Hey y'all, welcome to the City Limitless podcast, where we explore Mesa and beyond its city boundaries. I'm your host, Ashley, and this week we have Danny Zelisko from Danny Zelisko Presents, who is known to bring the best concerts to the Southwest, and specifically right here to Mesa, Arizona at our very own Mesa Amphitheater. Danny, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be had.
Now tell me, I let the audience know that you are a concert promoter, but I don't think people really understand what that is. Can you kind of walk us through how you got started and what this job really entails?
Well, what the concert promoter does is, instead of taking money and lighting fire to it, he puts concerts on. So just start there. The concert promoter is the guy who tries to match the audience for any particular singer or performer with a great hall, a great venue, on the right day of the week, charging the right ticket price that people won't be too shocked at or feel like it's a worthy purchase, and negotiate the fee and the engagement with the artists themselves. Generally, I don't speak to the singer, like I don't call Robert Plant up and say, hey, Bob, let's do a show together. It's more like an agent of his or of the band or a manager. Some representative will be in touch to do the business for the show. So once you make a show happen, in other words, you've agreed on a fee, you've agreed on the date, you've agreed on the hall, you agree when the show is going to go on sale and how it's going to be promoted, with what images and what verbiage, then you can promote the show and start selling tickets. And then when you get to the show day itself, you have to receive the band, whatever their entourage is. It could be one singer, or it could be 100 people, depending on the size of who it is. Regardless of the size it is, you have to arrange all their food and drinks for the day. You got to arrange their stagehands. You got to arrange all the details with the hall to make sure that you have the stagehands there, and the security and the people to let everybody in. The hall's got to make sure they have refreshments to serve to the audience. All of those things start with me calling up the hall saying, all right, that date we were holding for this show is now confirmed, and then we're off to the races.
Wow, that is a lot for one person to do.
So do that 14,000 times over 50 years.
Yeah, you were mentioning that. You're coming up on 50 years of doing just all of that.
Yeah, June 2nd, I had a show in Tucson, and it was called the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which featured a lot of amazing names in jazz at the time. John McLaughlin was the great guitar player that led the group. Jean-Luc Ponty, the violinist, was in the group. Michael Walden, the drummer turned producer, was in the group, and a bunch of other just stellar players. I'll tell you a quick funny story about that show. So I was a kind of an advocate and a disciple and a follower of a concert promoter called Bill Graham. And he was from San Francisco and New York. He operated these places called the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West, which are legendary concert venues from the 60s and early 70s. Bill Graham was inspirational to me in the sense that he would make up these shows like Grateful Dead and Miles Davis, or Led Zeppelin and Woody Herman's Thundering Herd. Just complete opposite bands to play together, kind of to keep the audience on their toes or off their toes. So I thought I'd go ahead and book an opening act for John McLaughlin. So I booked this brand new band out of San Francisco called Journey. And for $500, okay? That's their pocket money. But at the time, they were just starting out because a couple of them had left Santana on those first couple of great Santana records, and they started this new group up in San Francisco, where they're from, called Journey. So they're all excited because this was going to be their first concert as Journey outside of San Francisco. So I was like on the Virgin Voyage with Journey. So the manager of Mahavishnu finds out that I booked Journey, calls me up and he goes, "Is this your first show?" And I said, "Why? Does it show?" He goes, "I'm afraid, yes, it does." "Why?" He goes, "You booked Journey?" He goes, "Great band, love their record." He goes, "But they're not going to play." I said, "Why not?" He goes, "We have 23 people on stage. Once we set up and we do our sound check to make sure everything's right, nobody's moving anything on our stage. And you're not going to put in the drum kit and all those amplifiers and keyboards. So forget it. Tell them they're fired." So I had to fire Journey.
Oh my gosh.
First show. Welcome to show business.
Right? It's cutthroat.
So that was one of the very first rules and one of the many things that I had to find out the hard way, when I started. But the way I looked at it was, when anybody's in a new business, they're liable to make mistakes at one point or another. And that was mine.
Yeah. And you live and learn, right?
Oh, it's just unbelievable. What's so funny about that is that my daughter was born in 1988, so that would have been 14 years later. And they had a keyboard change in the group, and a guy called Jonathan Cain came into Journey, and he was the guy that wrote songs like Faithfully and a lot of their biggest songs. So we ended up becoming really, really good friends, to the point where when my daughter was born, his mother started watching my kid, and she became her godmother.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. So it's funny how that all happened. It seemed like it was really a long time ago, because it was, but it really not that long. When I think about it, it feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was off to a weird start there, okay?
Yeah, no. Now tell me, I want to bring it back, because we mentioned a little bit, you're not from Arizona, you're actually from Illinois, correct? Tell me Chicago area. So tell me how you got your very first start and taste into this industry.
As a little kid in the Chicagoland area, they had these AM radio stations, which hardly anybody listens to anymore in their cars or wherever. But the AM radio stations were our beacons in the 60s for music. They played Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, and they played all Elvis Presley, all the great bands of the day. And we followed these stations very closely. I had two older brothers by a few years than me, and every night before we went to bed, we would guess the songs or guess the bands that they were being played on the radio at night, with our little transistor radios under our pillows so our dad wouldn't hear them. After that, we continued our interest in music on the radio and everything, in sports, of course. And I became old enough so that we could all travel together to go down to Wrigley Field, see the Cubs play, and the Bears also played there. And at that time, unlike today where security is so heavy, the ball players would park across the street from the park and walk across to enter the park. So we had them for about 100 yards walking across the street. So we got all the autographs and pictures, and we got to know these guys pretty well. The Bears players used to walk us past the guards all the time into the games on Sundays, because there was no way you could get a ticket to see a game in Chicago then, because they were all sold out for years. And one thing led to another, and people found out that I knew some of these players. And my Little League asked me if I would get one of them to come and speak to our father and son banquet in the winter. So I started doing that. I did that for 5 years. They didn't pay me anything, but the players got paid, and I had to negotiate with them on behalf of the Little League, how much they were going to get paid. One of the first guys I did that with was a football player called Brian Piccolo. And Brian died very young, but they made a very famous movie about him called Brian's Song, that James Caan played Brian Piccolo in this movie, which I think he would have got a great big laugh out of. First thing he would have said was, "Is he even Italian?" Anyway, so Brian was the first guy that told me that when you book people, you get paid for doing that. And I said, "For what?" He goes, "Well, you got me money. Now I got the money. Now I got to pay you 10%. And he did. That was just kind of like a little fire starter for me. I mean, it didn't mean I went out and tried to do that all the time. I was 10 or 11 years old when this happened.
But a taste of the industry at such a young age and working with very well-known names already.
We kind of gravitated toward these people. And you got to remember, that many years ago, the whole fame game was nothing like it is now. I mean, you got famous back then if you were really good at something or if people really liked you. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, you know, you had Elvis, you had popular singing groups, Frank Sinatra. But I mean, it wasn't like today
where anybody could get famous.
Well, you know, yeah, for all kinds of different reasons, too. Some of them are valid and some of them are just because they catch on somehow, and good for them. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying there's anything bad about that, but that's the game that's out there these days. Back then, it was much, much different. I mean, you became famous by doing great stuff, mm-hmm. as I recall. And then the Beatles came along, and this was all over. Everybody wanted to be a Beatle. Everybody wanted to be a pop star. Everybody wanted girls screaming for them. Everybody wanted to make that big money they thought would be there. And it was eventually. My road kind of changed in that direction. I got into high school. I was still playing sports. I really wanted to be a major league catcher. That was what I was going to do. And then all this, I mean, the Beatles were already there by then. And in high school, I mean, music was in the 60s. People were still clamoring for even more of the music that was coming out because in the 60s, following the Beatles, rock and roll music just exploded much, much bigger than it ever did before in a different way more radical than these guys dressing in suits. And it became part of our culture and mixed with that, all of the political stuff of the times, the JFK things and his brother and Martin Luther King and the Grateful Dead in San Francisco and all this stuff mixed together with all of this great music and change.
Yeah.
It was almost impossible not to get swept up in that, whether you became a concert promoter or not. It didn't matter. It had a lot of impact on me. And by the time I was in high school and I was going to the concerts that were available to go to back then, not as many as there are today, but there were still a lot. And I really, really enjoyed the whole idea of the live concert. Mm-hmm. And I still do, obviously. And that's what kind of led to that. I never felt like I could make it in Chicago because Chicago is such an old city with roots, you know, from previous people. I mean, how are you going to break in there?
Yeah.
As I got a little older, junior or senior year, I got to go on a trip to senior year. I got to go on my first plane ride to California. And we drove back from there, my friend Alan and I, and we stopped in Arizona and I stayed in a house not too far from where I live right now. A friend of mine had moved to Paradise Valley and we stayed with him for a couple of days and I absolutely loved it. And I ended up moving back there the next year.
Wow.
And the year
what a quick turnaround.
And then the next year I started doing concerts and that's when we got to this Mahavishnu show. So I was 19.
Oh my gosh.
When I did my first show.
Now tell me, because like I said, we are Visit Mesa. You've brought many of shows to the Mesa Amphitheater. What is the attraction for a concert promoter to bring shows to this amphitheater? I mean, we're talking big names like we've had Willie Nelson for the last 3 years. Like, that is huge for our small little city.
You know, the thing is that small little city has been growing ever since I moved there. How many people live there now?
We got a little over 500,000, and I just looked that up today.
Well, take a look at what it was in 1974. If it was more than 30,000, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
But you see, Mesa was big, was part of a much bigger picture. I lived in Scottsdale. I think I lived behind the Der Wiener Schnitzel. The amphitheater opened in 1979. They had nobody. I mean, there was nowhere near the amount of promoters then that there are today, or people who think they are, I should say. But there's a number of legitimate promoters in Phoenix now. But back then, there was one guy booking the Celebrity Theater, and that was it. Any other shows that came to Arizona were brought by promoters from outside of the state because they would have them in LA or San Francisco or whatever. And they'd say, hey, what about Phoenix? Because we have the Coliseum in Phoenix where the state fair is, but is basically no longer used for anything but the state fair. But at that time, the Coliseum had the Phoenix Suns and it had the state fair, and it was the only large venue in town to do a concert. It was it. There was no downtown. There was no ASU. I mean, ASU was there, but there was no facility there at that time. So you either went to the Coliseum or you went to the Celebrity Theater or you didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
That's what you had to choose from. So I don't remember how it came about. I'm sure it's a really good story. But Mesa built this amphitheater, and I found out, and I was invited. Now, how old was I then? 24.
Oh, my gosh.
So I'd been promoting shows for a few years right down the street in Tempe at a place called Dooley's, which is at Terrace and Apache. Now it's a charter school. Unfortunately, it was a great room where we had a ton of amazing people play.
Oh, how times have changed.
Well, but the same thing's going on. It's just in a different location. Now you got the Crescent Ballroom or the Van Buren instead of these places for on the club side. But I went out to Mesa and I checked it out. Now, everything, it was another dimension in terms of costs. And there was a popular group that I managed in the late 70s called Loosely Tight. And they were kind of like a Leonard Skinner outlaw kind of a band. Very, like bikers would definitely like them. They did like them too. And they were the first band I put on at Mesa Amphitheater. I think it was $4 or $5. We did 1,000 or 1,500 people, but we christened the place very nicely. And I continued to book shows in that amphitheater because, it was really ahead of its time when it was built because there was hardly anybody around the country that had a venue that would hold 4,000 or 5,000 people like this right in the middle of town. So that part they didn't really do their homework on, because what happened was when we started doing concerts there in that neighborhood, the neighbors went berserk. And they called and they wrote letters to the mayor and the guy that ran the hall. And finally, we had to have a 10 p.m. curfew.
Wow.
It was 11 o'clock before that. Now, back in the day, I thought, they're just being old fuddy-duddies. If it was today and you put that amphitheater on my street and you were on after 10 o'clock, I'd be calling everybody up too. Right around that time, the guy who's running the Celebrity went away. So now I had Mesa Amphitheater to book, and I had the Celebrity Theater I could book, and Dooley's was still there. Dooley's was there till the mid-'90s. So I had a couple of really good places to book, and then I started getting shows in the Coliseum. And then ASU built their activity center so I could book shows there. And little by little, Phoenix became a city, and it wasn't because of music or because of people bringing shows in, but it didn't hurt because now it's on the tip of everybody's tongue, in the industry. Phoenix was a city you used to drive through to get to LA or to get to Texas or to get up to Colorado. And now Phoenix had a stop, and then I added Tucson to it, and then I started going to Albuquerque. I had a friend of mine, Chuck DeLeonardis, who lived there, and we started doing shows together there in the late 70s. And then in the early 80s, we started doing shows in Las Vegas, which would have nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know nothing about rock and roll music or people like me. But little by little, we got in there. We started doing shows at the Aladdin Hotel, which is now Planet Hollywood. It took a few years, but I went from making absolutely no money from the time I started until I signed on with Dooley's. They hired me for $80 a week.
Oh my gosh.
Big money. But then, little by little, you develop yourself a little bit of a reputation as being a good person to do business with. And these agencies that I was telling you about before, who book these different groups, all of them have different groups, but they often change within each other. It's very incestuous business how these groups go from one agent to another agent, thinking that somebody's going to do better for them. And sometimes they do. But that's pretty much how all of everything came to be, because in the 80s, I was there by myself. In the 90s, I was there by myself. I didn't have any competition. And it wasn't because I was buying people off or doing anything weird. It just turned out that little by little, we built with our building blocks, we ended up getting relationships with all the agents and the managers and a lot of great bands. I thought it was very orderly. Compton Terrace came along, which is where Wild Horse Pass is. If you're driving down the highway on I-10 towards Tucson, on the right side there where that casino is, you see a giant racetrack oval.
Yep.
And we had 40,000 people there for the Grateful Dead.
Wow. Wow.
It's a place that if you don't know about the history of Phoenix, you don't know that place was there, but it was a gas.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
And hosting that a large amount of people. But I want to take it back really quick to Mesa, because we've had plenty of shows here. The history of the amphitheater is insane, and our downtown area is growing. We are booming as a mini micro brewery scene. We have multiple restaurants that are coming up. Do you feel like any of those entities are helping feed guests and concert goers into the amphitheater when you do have concerts coming here?
I don't know that answer.
I didn't mean to stump you. Sorry.
Obviously, it can't hurt. But see, what I was getting to a little bit ago was Mesa's part of a big entertainment scene with having the amphitheater in the Center for the Arts, without question. They bring a lot of people to that downtown area. In the past, the venues have always come in first. Frankly, I don't know why it's taken so long, because we've been doing shows there through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 40 years plus. I'm really glad to hear that. I haven't gone down Main Street in quite a while.
Come down here, check it out.
When I come to a show in Mesa, at either place, I pretty much drive there, go to work, and get out of Dodge.
Yeah. Head home after a long day.
The increase out there and beyond in population is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear that the downtown is getting there.
We're getting our groove back, really. We'd love to have you come down here sometime, and we'll show you around and take you out to certain dinners.
Problem. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
There used to be a great barbecue place right down Main Street there. Going back towards Tempe, he was amazing. I don't know whatever happened to that guy.
Yeah, that might be long gone now. But let's bring it back.
It's gone and a half.
So moving forward, you have a new title that you've added to your accomplishments over the last 50 years, and that is now author. Can you tell me a little bit about your book that you wrote?
I started working on it years and years ago. I have lists on emails, and God forbid, before that, I found some faxes that were disappearing because the fax ink disappears, and a lot of notes with a lot of the stuff that ended up in the book, and I just never got around to doing it. The funny thing was, one night I was watching Shark Tank, and this guy came on and he said, "I'll write your book for you, or I'll
Wow.
help you write your book." So I called him the next day, and we made a deal. And although he didn't finish it with me, he at least got me going with it. And then the pandemic happened, and suddenly I found myself with more time in my hands than I wanted. So this gave me and my staff something fun to do. So we started collecting the pictures and getting the chapters together, and just doing what you have to do to make a book, which is one of the hardest things ever. It's very, very tedious work. My friend Tandra, who works for us as our graphic designer, she was the one that physically put all of this stuff together, and it was a big deal. It took most of that year, and then we ended up getting it printed locally, and that was quite the effort there. But the thing was, I didn't have a publisher, and a publisher is somebody who gets the book some attention by sending out copies for reviewers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely different business than what I'm in.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that business. So I fortunately for me, I didn't go ordering 20,000 books. I think we ordered them of 500 or 1,000 at a time, and we ended up selling almost all of them. I wish that it had gotten around and gotten reviewed and gotten noticed, because everybody I know that's seen it or read it really enjoyed it. I don't know if they're just being nice to me, but have you seen it? You should have seen it by now, no?
I have not personally seen it, but I did think you can get it still on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're checking into that. I'm pretty sure you can, but the last time I looked, they said, I guess people can go back to Amazon and resell their books.
Yeah, there is a reselling process, so maybe it's getting in more hands than you think.
They're out there, and I'm partial to it because I did it, and all of us put a lot of work into it, but it was fun to do.
Give the name of the book, and our listeners, if they want to check it out, they can try and do some research, get their hands on it, but throw it out there.
Yeah, it's called All Excess with an E. So it was a little takeoff from our backstage passes. Let me see if I can show you.
Oh yeah, how fun. Yep, there it is. A spin-off of that.
But I didn't want to use All Access because it's been used so many times before. All Access for this business seemed a lot better.
Yeah. Well, Danny, let's wrap this up on a high note. You're hitting 50 years this year. What does the future hold for you, and what are you looking forward to the most?
I guess as long as people still want to do shows with me and enough to keep a business open, I'll keep doing it. I really enjoy it. We've made so many lifelong friends through this business. Many of those people from the 70s I'm still very good friends with and in touch with. The sad part is, as time goes on, we lose some of these people either to being old or illness or death and miserable things like that suddenly, it's not a fantasy anymore. The reality of all that really sinks in. So the future, I hope, includes just remaining friends and having fun and not working too hard. I'm going all over the country doing shows with people that I like in places that I like to go to. We're doing about 125 shows, give or take, a year, which is very comfortable. During the 90s, we were doing 400 to 500 shows per year.
Oh my gosh.
So and we had a great staff. And everything got handled. It seemed like a lot, and it was, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it sounds. This is the same way. Our staff isn't that big, but they're great people, and they do a great job, and we work well together. And as long as that happens, and it's not more trouble than it's worth, then I'll keep doing it. And I expect that'll keep happening for a while. I can't put a date on it by any means.
Yeah. Well, Danny, thank you so much. We're so thankful for the shows that you've brought to the Mesa Amphitheater, your knowledge around the history of the Mesa Amphitheater, and even more excited to have you on. And I think we should do another future episode, get you in person. Maybe we go grab some beers, eat some burgers on Main Street, and we can kind of just chat and show you around downtown Mesa.
That's great. Yeah, there's a guy called Randy Vogel who runs the Mesa Arts Center down there. So tell the mayor to give him a raise. He works too hard.
I will. All right, Danny. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy your vacation, and we'll catch up with you soon, okay?
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that's a wrap for season 1 of City Limitless, the podcast. Check us out on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Check out all of our episodes that we've done this last season. Like, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned because we are so excited. Season 2 is in production. We're taking a little bit of a break, but we've got some good stuff in the works. We'll see you guys soon.
That's where I feel free.